Okay, I'm cleaning up the eyes. You can see here that I'm doing that. And I'm using, again, the healing brush tool. I'm going to check the size here, and I'm going to make it smaller so I can hit all these little spots without getting too large of a sample. Just take care of a bunch of these little dots. And you'll notice that here I'm going to drag, click and drag, and that's kind of okay, but when I click and drag here, I want you to notice, see how it's kind of like blurry and painty. I'm going to undo that last one, and actually I'll undo both of them. I'll come back to that later, but right now I'll show you that sometimes it's actually better with sometimes in parts of lines to just click them. Other parts like this you can click and drag, but like around the edges and stuff I needed to click because otherwise it would have dragged too many of the other weird not right pixels in there. Okay, so this might not be the best tool for right now, so I'm going to jump over here and go to the patch tool, and I'm going to take some of these parts of the iris that are damaged and find the pure black parts for, actually it's the pupil, not the iris, so that I can get the black pupil to look, appropriately dark. And you can see that I'm not just taking one giant swath with the patch tool. I'm actually grabbing pieces and parts so that I can make sure it's the right thing. So now I can go back over to the Spot Healing tool. And this part looked okay with a drag, but then I have to like sort of click in spots around it. And you notice like on that edge, I lost the integrity of the edge a little bit. So I might have to, I need to probably, might need to undo that. That looks okay. So I was able to get the integrity of that edge okay. But then I need to go in and clean up around different parts of the eye. And sometimes you can see you don't always hit it on the very first shot, but it might take a couple of clicks. And see, now it's actually starting to look a little bit better if I don't just drag that lower section inside the eyeball. And then I'll show you what, see if I try doing that, it's like a little blurry, I need to undo that. And we can try a few different things. We can also try doing, like selecting it and let's try a content fill. So if we go up to image or edit fill, and then we choose content aware, you can try OK, and that didn't quite do the job either. It looks like it just sort of cut some of the eyelashes off short, so I'll undo that. And this might be a good job for the patch tool, because then we can intentionally select the content aware area that we want to replace, but we can do it manually, and so we have a lot more control over it. We're not letting Photoshop guess what's right, and that looks a lot better. It looks more like continuous eyelashes. And so I have my patch tool selected, and then now I can start to recreate parts of this eyelid. And you'll notice that I'm not just sort of randomly dragging the samples. I'm actually selecting samples that are in the correct value range, and that's really important. And same is true here. I'm just sort of clicking, and they're in the same value range. And the reason is because you'll notice that the curve of that eyelid has a lot of different values, like a gradient. And if you mess up the tonal range of the gradient by trying to take too many samples out of one area at one time, then you end up having problems. Also, it's really important that you maintain the integrity of the edge of this crease in the eyelid, where the eyelid sort of goes into the eye socket. It's really becomes extremely obvious whenever you don't do that right. If you get a weird bump in there, it sort of looks like something's wrong with your eyelid. So we have to be really conscientious about taking our time in this area. And so you can see I'm doing this now with the clone stamp, because the clone stamp is really the thing that's working best for me here. Because then I can deliberately select my samples. And and you see I'm doing like option, and when I hold the option key down and click, that's when I get to take the sample. All right, and then now I'm switching back to my healing brush. And it sort of is just doing the spot healing for me. It's very similar to what a clone stamp does, except that I'm not taking the sample first. It's making those assumptions for me. So sometimes you can really easily get away with just using the healing brush like this, and other times you really need to use the clone tool. And you just have to experiment to figure out when those best times are. But so far, I'll just use the easier thing until it stops working properly, and then I can see when I need to use something that's a little bit different, or maybe a little more complex in its uses. And you notice like around the eyebrows and the places where a lot of small changes are occurring, like, you know, where there's a transition to the eyebrow to the eyelid, you know, that's where I'm taking care, especially to do a lot of little small brush clicks. And then, you know, maybe when I get to some of this larger swath in here, you know, I can start to be a little bit more liberal about the use of my brush and dragging it in larger areas. And then you can just check it and see if it looks okay, and then it does, and the lightness and darkness values are still good. And you'll notice I didn't go back and fix the rest of the eye. I'll go back to that. All right, I'm going to zoom out, and I'm just going to jump to a different part as part of my way of, you know, checking everything, making sure that everything looks good. And you can see I'm jumping over here where I had rebuilt the eyebrow. I'm going to lower my brush size a little bit, and I'm going to go back in here and start to fool around with the hair. And I'm going to turn my hardness up too, because the softer your brush is, a lot of times you'll lose that texture, that important texture of surrounding nearby pixels. And in order for it to still look like a real picture, like the original real file, you really need to maintain the original texture of the surrounding pixels to some degree at least. Otherwise it'll just start looking like something that's like smeared and painted. And so now you can see there's some damage in this area, but it's kind of subtle. And so I'm kind of like testing the waters in different areas to make sure that, you know, maybe here I can drag it, here I can drag it, because that was a swipe of hair. That one doesn't look so good. I'm going to undo that. And then maybe here it's got too much damage. I need to go in and click and fill some of it before I start to swipe it with that brush tool. And then that one looks okay after I cleaned it up a little bit. And then I'm just going to see if I can try to create some of this hairline. And you see that like sometimes the damage is too pervasive. You might need to come in with a really small clone brush, clone tool, and then make the brush really small and then manually duplicate the nearby pixels just so you can create a larger place from which to sample. And you're going to see that I do this a lot in this picture, because there are some parts of this picture that have so much damage it's just really hard to repair. And sometimes just going in and just filling stuff in properly with the clone stamp, it actually is faster and it produces better results in some cases. And that's what I'm doing here in this hairline area. But it's still important that I'm trying to maintain the original texture as much as possible for the image. And I mean, you'll see that I'm blown up 400%, you know, to 400% of the image right now. So if I can get it looking, you know, still pretty close to the original texture at 400%, and you know, when I zoom back out, it should look pretty good, you know, to the native 100%. But part of the reason I'm showing you all of this detail as I do this is because it really is this important. If you really need something to look really good, you really need to take the time to put the detail in. And a lot of the videos that you might see on, you know, Adobe's website, as I said before, you know, they're just quick and dirty little videos. They're fast and simple. And sometimes what they show you is it's a set of reparations that are going to be really simple. And sometimes, you know, the reality is that your file is way more complex than what they show you. So I don't want you to think that it's just always that simple. I need to raise my brush here to a bigger brush, and then I can start taking all of that stuff that I just went in and created, and I can start to reproduce it in larger swaths. You can see here I can start to create some of the darker hairline at the top now that I made sure that the smaller section looked good. And here I've got some duplicated material, so I'll go in and I'll make sure it doesn't look like it's duplicated. There we go. And so now that looks a lot cleaner than it did before with all that damage, and that part of the hairline is not too bad. Okay, and you can see I'm just sort of checking out some of that skin. And then because we have this textural damage right here just beneath the hairline, you know, the clone stamp can be really good because you can take pixels that are nearby that have the correct skin or whatever, you know, the material is, whatever that texture is, and you can reproduce it so that you can grab values that are the same values from nearby and reproduce them. And you can see up here, you know, her forehead's looking pretty scrubby because of the damage. It's like water damage in the photo. And so we can kind of reproduce that so it starts to look more realistic. You know, and like if this is your own personal photo and, you know, maybe you don't need it to be as fussy, that's one thing. But if you're doing it for client work, they're going to want things to look pretty perfect. And so it is really important that you know how to do something with this kind of detail, even if it means that, you know, you have to break something down in different price ranges for the amount of time spent. But like if you're working on a project, you know, for some sort of multimedia project or a movie or something like that, you know, and the expectation is that things are going to look real. I had to undo that because the value was a little bit too bright. So since it didn't work so well, I'm going to take the patch tool and I'm going to take that and I'm going to replace it with a nearby texture that I just repaired and see how that looks. And then again, I'll do that. See, what I'm doing is sort of recreating some textures based off of other textures, and because I've got my patch tool set to content aware, it's generally it's pretty good about figuring out how to blend stuff without it looking too blended and blurry. Sometimes though it needs some help. Let's see how this section does. That top section was kind of okay, but let's see how this section does, see if we can make it really a quick edit or if we need to go back. And let's do this one last little bit down here. And I'm thinking, I don't know about this. It's looking a little bit brush strokey and choppy to me. I don't really think that looks very good. That is not really acceptable. So if yours is looking kind of like that, that's really, it looks like it's been retouched. It looks like it's been retouched poorly. So I'm going to undo that work and I'm going to start showing you a different way to approach it in the next video.